jump out of an airplane. He actually made 4 jumps to save his life. And after the first one, he made the statement that even if he only lived 10 years more before he had a fatal accident in an airplane, it would be worth it having a short life because he would have been able to fly. That's how much he was in love with So on April Fool's Day in 1922, he took his first flight as a passenger, 10 years after he saw that first airplane. Now his dad, who I've said was a huge supporter of his son's love of this fairly new technology, co-signed in 1923 a loan of $900 to buy a surplus World War I jet. And if you are a threadless stamp collector, you may remember it was the Jenny, I think, that was on the upside-down stamp that was. So here's some Jennies right here from World War I. They paid $900 for it. Same year, he took his first solo flight. This was in the early days of that industry, so think about this a minute. You didn't need a license. All you had to do was be able to get that airplane up and land, walk away from it. So he took his first solo flight in 1923. He was now considered a pilot, and the next year in 1924, he joined the United States Army as a cadet to learn how to fly. This was a young man by the name of, I get his name right here, Bud Gurney. And he met Bud in flight school, and they became fast friends and were lifelong friends. I'm not sure whatever happened to Bud, but he became a pilot as well. Now, it was in 1925, while training, they trained at Kelly Field right here. I'm sure Kelly Field, this area looks a whole lot different today than it did back then. But you see the airplanes up here, you see the entrance to Kelly Field, you see the barracks. In 1925, while he was learning to fly as a cadet, he had his first mid-air collision. And the planes, as I understand it, sort of came together and crashed, and they locked fuselages. So the pilot of the other plane jumped out. They had parachutes. That was fairly new technology. Lindbergh jumped out as well and landed safely. It would be the first of 4 emergency jumps that he would have to make. Graduated, or was graduated, very first in his class in the Army, and he went to work for Robertson Aircraft Company in St. Louis. He was their chief pilot. What did they do? They delivered the mail. You actually see Lindbergh here on the right in the airplane loading the mail. The next emergency jump he made, he was practicing spins, and he was not able to pull the airplane out of the spin. So he jumped again. The third one was in a blinding snow and rainstorm, and he ran out of fuel. Now, someone of Lindbergh's caliber, you wouldn't think would run out of fuel. They sort of autopsied the airplane a little bit later, and what they discovered was the mechanics who had worked on the airplane, there was a problem with the fuel tank. They took the old fuel tank out, under 10 gallons. They put the new fuel tank in, 85 gallons, and they thought he had a 110-gallon tank. He's flying in a blinding snowstorm and a rainstorm, and jumps out, survives. So did the mail. They came along, picked up the mail, and they delivered it. The fourth one was an accident where he actually landed on a barbed wire fence, tore his flight suit. What pulled him off was the wind's gun. The parachute pulled him out of that. Some folks were in the field. They came along. They were able to collapse the parachute. He survived that. In this incident, the mail got soaked with gasoline and oil. But you know that old saying, rain, snow will deliver the mail? They picked it up, they dried it off, and they delivered that mail. This is actually, I think this is the 3rd or 4th crash right here. The last crash, I believe this is crash number 4. What happened was when he jumped out, he's coming down, the winds are really bad, and he notices the plane starts to circle around. So here he is coming down from about 5,000 feet. The plane is circling, and he was very concerned that at some point the two of them were going to collide. and he would be able to survive it. But as it happened, it crashed about 2 miles away, and you see it right here. As he came down, his parachute at the very end also had a problem, and it banged up his shoulder. But all male men back then had to sign this oath that said he would faithfully perform all the duties required and abstain from everything forbidden by laws in relation to the establishment of the post offices and the post roads in the United States of America. If there was any money, he'd be responsible. To help pay for learning how to fly, he became a daredevil barnstormer. And as a pilot, that probably would have been okay, but he also, as part of what he did, had to do something that he wrote later that he just was not comfortable with doing whatsoever. And that was walking on the wings. Now, this is not Lindbergh right here. Couldn't find a picture of Lindbergh wing walking, but this is a very famous wing walker of the day, Gladys Engel. She's not strapped down. She's standing on the wings of this airplane, and you see in the second photograph, it has to get close enough to where she can actually jump onto that airplane and not fall. My question, in looking at this first picture, where is the photographer? But I mean, he's like straight on that wing. So, as part of his barnstorming and wing walking, he appeared with Vera Mae Dunlap's Flying Circus. They had a lot of flyers that would come in, do tricks, do acrobatics, aerobatics. But what made Lindbergh so special with Vera Mae Dunlap's Flying Circus, I don't know if you can read it down here, but it said, last but not least, is Lieutenant Chaz A. Lindbergh, who saved his life by jumping from an aerial collision on March 6, 1925 in Kelly Field, Texas. So his big draw was, he was not just a good pilot, he had actually jumped out of an airplane. That's what people came to see. What we really know him for is his flight across the Atlantic Ocean in the Spirit of St. Louis. He helped design this airplane, paid $10,580 for the cost for an airplane. He bought it because he took up the challenge of the Raymond Orteig brothers. And Orteig was a New York hotelier who came from France. In fact, he came to the United States when he was 2 years old. An immigrant. As a teenager, he started working as a porter in bars and hotels. He became a self-made man, worked his way up to manager, worked his way up to owning at least a couple of hotels. And because of the success that he had in the United States, so Jay right there, he became a philanthropist. Now, he was not a philanthropist on the level of, for example, the Rockefellers. But in that day and age, for what he had accomplished, he was willing to put money back into the country that had been so good to him. So he put up a $25,000 prize, which was a lot of money in those days, for the first person to be able to fly from New York to Paris or Paris to New York. And before Lindbergh tried it, several folks actually tried it, and they all crashed, and the majority of them actually perished, actually died. Some on water, some of them on land. It's been documented that up to and including Lindbergh, all of the people who tried to win that $25,000 prize combined spent $400,000 building their aircraft and landing training. $5,000 prize. But what really is neat about that particular prize is that it was the direct inspiration for the X Prize, which I believe it was in 2004, saw the first non-governmental agencies put an astronaut into space, bring them back, relaunch them. So that was a direct inspiration for that. This is how they designed the Spirit of St. Louis. Pretty simple. What is interesting about this, though, it has no front windshield. Fuel was so precious that instead of the front windshield, they put a gas tank in. And the question is, well, how do you fly? Well, you had a window, and he had a periscope. See the periscope right there in the design? This is at the back of the Spirit of St. Louis, looking forward toward the cockpit. This is the actual cockpit with notations made by Charles Lindbergh as he was calculating his fuel during his flights. And this is the periscope. That's how he flew it, right there. So he left on May 20th of 1927. See his flight there, his flight path. How many of you seen the Jimmy Stewart movie? Remember? He was very concerned that he would land in Paris and nobody would know what he was there for. So he took letters of introduction from people in the United States so that he could handle it. That was not an issue. When he landed, there was no crowd control. They thronged that field to see him. People started to take things off of the airplane. And either he or someone else had to punch a hole in the airplane and take out the barograph. The barograph actually kept a record of the air pressures that he experienced on flight. If he had landed, then it would show the pressure had gone down to sea level or whatever the altitude was. Show that he did not do a nonstop flight in the air. So they had to punch a hole in the airplane and take that barograph out before somebody took it, and if there was actually accomplished a flight. He left on May 20th from Long Island at about 6:52 in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. He arrived in Paris the next day. As I said, he was mobbed by thousands and thousands of people. And before he left, Harry Guggenheim, how many of you have seen the movie Men in Black? You know where Will chases the alien around the round silver building? That's the Guggenheim Museum. Guggenheims were extremely wealthy and philanthropists as well. Their philanthropy to Ortega makes me look like, throwing a few bucks into the Salvation Army. But Guggenheim looked him up. Guggenheim was interested in this particular new technology, and he told Lindbergh, "Come see me when you get back." Privately, Guggenheim didn't think that Lindbergh. The relationship between Guggenheim and Lindbergh becomes really important to New Mexico a few years later. We'll talk about that. So if you haven't seen the movie, I highly recommend it. It's considered accurate. You can't get much better than Jimmy Stewart, but he had to lose 30 pounds to play Slim. Is this a newspaper that you have right there in your bag? You can imagine the publicity. It's very similar. You can imagine the publicity of the newspapers. This was about the guy that didn't think anybody was going to know him or do what he did when he landed in Paris. Newspapers put out headlines and stories, extras documenting the entire trip along the way. What I'd like to know is there's a headline down at the bottom that says Lindbergh to get fortune-sized prize of $25,000. I've been able to figure out yet exactly what that fortune was and where it came from. When he arrived in Paris, his intention was at some point to turn around and return, fly back. The president, Calvin Coolidge, nixed that pretty quickly. He wanted to lose two assets: Lindbergh, the new American hero, and the Spirit of St. Louis airplane. So what they did, he didn't return until June 11th to the United States, and he came back on the USS Memphis. He did a tour around Europe for a little while until he returned home. And on June 18th, they gave him the largest ticker tape at that point in history. Another photograph over here. Time magazine named him the Man of the Year for 1927. It would be one of, I think, at least 3 times that Lindbergh would make the cover of Time magazine. The old movie newsreels show photographs of him and film of him taking off. I had some of that playing before we started the presentation today. And as you can imagine, he got the $25,000. On November the 2nd, there was a dinner, and it was a testimonial dinner, and it says, it was at the Hotel Brevoort. I believe that was one of 14 hotels, and handed over the check for $25,000 on the Bryant Park Bank. Here's a bit of trivia. Who else knows what Bryant Park is famous for? Where the Douglases lived, and my three sons. In Bryant Park before they moved to California. But yeah, $25,000 right there would take me very good on this prize. Within a month, the United States Post Office has had stamps. When you're done, we have some later postal stamps here from our curatorial department, who's kind enough to bring these up. So you can take a look at those. We have a photograph of Guggenheim and Lindbergh, just their artifacts, so don't touch them. And I actually brought a couple of 78 records up here that are recordings put out at the time of Lindbergh speaking before the Congress and Lindbergh speaking at the Press Club on June 11th, that he was speaking. Tin Pan Alley got very, very busy. There were just, it seemed like any number of songs about Lindbergh, and if you're going to write songs, somebody has to record them. These were very popular recording artists of the day. Vernon Dalhart, Jack Kaufman. These were extremely popular and sold very, very well. Here's another bit of trivia. A lot of the headlines. Lindbergh hops off for Paris. Lindbergh hops across the Atlantic Ocean. Anybody want to take a guess as to what that led to? The Lindy hop. Yeah. That was the inspiration for the dance known as the Lindy hop, which, in reading about it, nobody hopped. They just, a lot of spinning and dancing. But they called it the Lindy hop. His name was synonymous with many products. Everybody wanted his endorsement, from watches to jewelry stores to cigars to toys, toy airplanes that you could buy so that your kid could become greater than Charles Lindbergh. Now, he was even considered one of, if not the most eligible bachelor in the world. On the left there is Jean Tutton. On the right is the Crown Prince of Great Britain. But who's got the bigger picture and who's in the center? It was Charles Lindbergh with his youthful good looks and his hero status and accomplishment. He was considered a greater catch for girls, young women, than the Crown Prince. And of course, he became very well known in the airline industry, and through the years, you can see back there TWA, the Lindbergh line, often used for advertisements as well. You can't see it at the top there, but he became interviewed en masse, and that was the story in November of 1929 in Popular Mechanics. What did Lindbergh do after doing all of this, after being declared an American and world hero? He went back to delivering mail. This is a photograph a friend of his took and notated along the bottom. But after he returned from his flight to Paris, he went back to where he was living and flew airmail once again. You can see that. That didn't last really a long time. In 1929, he got married to Anne Morrow. They were married until his death in 1972. 6 children. The first we'll talk about in a minute, of course, was kidnapping. Neither one were really faithful to the other. Documented she had a couple of affairs, one very long term. He was in his 50s. He had 3 children by 3 women in Europe. And that's been confirmed a few years ago through DNA testing, which, when it came out, really stymied a lot of folks. He wasn't, and you'll see more about that here momentarily, but he was a eugenicist. He believed in the purification. And that caused some fallout with him leading up to and during World War II. 2 of the women that he had a child each by were sisters in Europe, and both of them were disabled. So for someone who considers disability not a good basis for reproducing, he had 2 children with 2 disabled women who both happened to be sisters. She became very well known in her own right. She wrote several books. And after World War II, the growing popularity of her as an artist helped to restore the reputation that was tarnished during World War II. She lived, I think died around 2001. You see them giving away one of their daughters right there. Of course, eventually, the Spirit of St. Louis went to the Smithsonian, where it now hangs. But after his flight, he went on a nationwide tour in 1927. He did 82 stops in 48 states. Why not 50? Well, there are only 48 states. He made the first non-stop flight from Washington to Mexico City, where he undertook a tour of Latin America. He was awarded the Medal of Honor, and he became a consultant to Transcontinental Airlines and Spirit of St. Louis. He actually flew it there himself and handed it over as an artifact, where today it hangs in the same gallery as the spaceship one. I understand from Natalie back there, who used to work there, that they may have moved some of those around, but they're all in the same gallery. So there's kind of another new memory. Yeah, Chuck Yeager's. Yeah. All right, so we're going to talk about the crime of the century, and this really had a huge impact. I just couldn't imagine having to go through something like this. It had a huge impact on how the Lindberghs felt about America. Their not quite 2-year-old son was kidnapped on March 1st of 1932, their first child. You see him celebrating his first birthday there, Charles Lindbergh Jr. You see the ransom note on the bottom right, and you see Anne, the child over there. There's no mistaking that young boy looked a lot like Charles Lindbergh. Very cute child. There are some theories. I wish I had time to sit around and come up with these. There are some theories that he was involved in it. I can't imagine that being true. But the child was taken at night on that date by someone who put a ladder up to the bedroom. Obviously, they knew where the bedroom was. Went into the house, took the child, and spirited him away. There was a $50,000 ransom asked for, which in today's dollars is $844,000. The child was not found until May 12th, and a shallow grave about 4 miles. I'm certain that the skull was fractured pretty soon after the buried in a shallow grave. This drama carried out in the newspaper headlines for a couple of months. There was of course, London posters put out. President Roosevelt himself personally went on radio and made an appeal. And none other than Al Capone offered his henchmen to track down. I don't know if they took him up on that or not. But it was, as I said, played out in the headlines, all kinds of clues. Every time something new came up, there was a newspaper headline about it. Photograph again. This was an eyewitness sketch of the kidnapper. And based on that, 2 years later, they arrested Bruno Hauptmann, who does look a lot like that. They only arrested Hauptmann after he was caught cashing in some of the gold notes that were part of the $50,000 ransom. What's interesting about that, however, is this is John Null, who looks a lot like that photographer, that drawing as well, that police artist. John Null was his nickname, they called him Cemetery John, because he was the man that the $50,000 was handed over to in the cemetery. But because Hoffman was passing the golden notes, he was one that was actually arrested, who was tried. You see Lindbergh there testifying in court. This is Hoffman right here in court. Not speak English very well, but he was basically a laborer. He would stand in his own defense and denied his guilt until he was executed. There's a headline. You're seeing Hoffman at the moment right here where he's found guilty. His defense team. Of course, he was convicted, and he died not too long after that. In the last words allegedly were, "They think when I die, the case will die. They think it will be like a book I close, but the book, it will never close." A lot of folks take that as the basis for it. The Lindberghs were so disheartened and fed up with the press, fed up with the attention that they left the country, fled to Europe. They were there a few years. Lindbergh there became kind of enamored of Germans because of their technological abilities. A guy whose love is airplanes, and the Germans obviously superior in aircraft design, manufacturing, rocketry for sure, we know from our space history. At one point he was asked to do a tour of the German aircraft facilities, and here you see him right now. He was, I believe, accorded an honor by Hermann Göring himself. When he was asked to give it back, he said something to the effect that he thought it would be an utter insult if he had to hand back the award that he This is where he began to fall out of favor with the United States. He wrote in a Reader's Digest article, which was printed in 1939, quote, "We can have peace and security only so long as we band together to preserve that most priceless possession, our inheritance of European blood. Only so long as we guard ourselves against attack by foreign armies and dilution by foreign races." That didn't set well with the American public. His speeches and writings reflected that belief, and actually when he would make public appearances, find film of his public appearances in the late 1930s where he espouses these views and moved off the stage. His star for a time definitely followed. His wife, in support of her husband, wrote a 41-page booklet called The Wave of the Future, in which she said he at the time was lobbying for a peace treaty between Germany. She said that something resembling fascism was the unfortunate, quote, wave of the future. In fact, the booklet, as I said, was called Wave of the Future. You can imagine how this set with the Roosevelt administration. This did not go over well with Roosevelt and his cabinet. And they attacked it and said it is the Bible of every American Nazi, fascist, and appeaser. And it became, with the American public, one of the most despised writings of that period. She also wrote a letter, which surfaced sometime later, that said Hitler was a very great man, an inspired religious leader, and as such rather fanatical, but not scheming, not selfish, and not greedy. So when he came back in the late 30s to the United States, he became the spokesman for what was known as the American First Party. And this picture wasn't identified, but I believe it's probably in or around Fort Wayne, Indiana. I grew up, we used to listen to Whoa Whoa Radio over there, and we're all letters right there. No. I suspect that it's in or around Fort Wayne, Indiana. Some of these speeches that he was booed, but he became their spokesperson, and he became the figure for which they tried to recruit new members to the American First Party. you can't read that. There is a paper in Roosevelt's hands that says the story about the destruction of religion throughout the world. And in the cartoon right there, the young boy says, "That's awful. Now read the one about Uncle Joe killing the 50,000 Christians." And so Lindbergh was very anti-war. As I mentioned earlier, he probably got that from his father, who resigned from the Congress to protest World War I. But this is an actual handbill recruiting for the American First Party. So because he'd fallen out of respect from the American public, there were lots of letters written to the FBI, and his file grew. This is one of those letters right there, written to J. Edgar Hoover. "Dear Edgar, may I please direct your attention to the text of Colonel Lindbergh." There were a lot of letters written to the government, and the file became pretty big. As I mentioned earlier, what helped bring them back into the favor after the war was the books that popular, sort of what they faded into the background. This also helped their popularity right here. This is a perfusion home, and in the 1930s, Lindbergh had a sister-in-law who was dying. He had an interest in biology, made the acquaintance of Alexis Carroll, who was a 1912 Nobel. This is a pump that Lindbergh actually invented. It's glass. And what it does, it allows sterilized fluid to discharge. Windows runs the world. So this perfusion pump actually sterilizes fluid that an organ outside of the human body can be put into and kept alive. Carroll had actually worked with animal organs and was not able to keep them alive and functioning past the point of a quick infection. This pump right here allowed human organs to be able to be kept alive for weeks and even months. This made a huge advancement in medical technology, and it is a direct ancestor of the artificial heart pump. So Lindbergh, not many people know, actually invented that. Once that technology became, sort of kind of came into putting back into favor. This is Carroll right there. They made the cover of Time magazine again. Wrote this publication called The Culture of Organs. Now, I mentioned Harry Guggenheim. This is Guggenheim on the left right there, the Philosophic family. And you may remember that Guggenheim introduced himself to Lindbergh before the 1927 flight. Didn't think Lindbergh was going to survive it. Nobody else had. But said, when you get back, look me up. And that's what Lindbergh did. Looked up Harry Guggenheim. They actually became friends. Robert Goddard in Massachusetts, when the fire marshal told Goddard, "You can't do your experimentation here anymore. You're corrupting the public, you're setting things on fire. You just can't do that in the state of Massachusetts." So Lindbergh, who was helping the government set up training centers all over the country to teach people how to fly, introduced himself to Goddard, and the two of them went to see Harry Guggenheim. That was the first time that Goddard had ever flown. What I can understand, it may have been the last, because Lindbergh took him up, they went into dives, they went across the tops of the trees, they went back up into the air, and that didn't set very well with Goddard. There's some great anomalies in this story. Ortiz, who gave him a $25,000 prize when he would go back to visit his native France and visited Europe, he was not flying an airplane. He always took a ship till the day he died. But Lindbergh took Goddard on his first flight, introduced him to Harry Guggenheim, convinced them, the Guggenheims, of the viability of rocketry. Lindbergh was also interested in JATO, what became Jet Assisted Takeoff, and at this point in time, could rocketry help planes take off of ships, Navy ships, faster than if they just had to taxi down the runway and take off. So they went to see Guggenheim, and in 1929, Guggenheim made Goddard two gifts of $50,000 each, $100,000. That money, he resigned his teaching position, came to Roswell, New Mexico, and for the majority of the rest of Goddard's life, worked on rocketry here in New Mexico, Roswell, Mescalero Ranch. We have several New Mexico connections to Charles Lindbergh. Another one right here is, this is Lindbergh's grandson, Eric Lindbergh, and they are dedicating the NASA Sophia airplane. We were involved in that in 3 years. And that is a 747 that went into service in 1976, eventually was scrapped, turned into the Sophia aircraft, which flies into the stratosphere, and is known as the Clipper Lindbergh. Lindbergh actually flew on that airplane. Several New Mexico connections. That is our presentation. As I said at the beginning, we could go on for a long time. Lone Eagle lived 1902 to 1974. He was living in Hawaii when he died of cancer. 72 years old. You can see him as a young man up there. You can see him as an older man down below. And I like that picture because it shows the spirit of St. Louis after the flight over there. As I said, he made some trips around France and around Paris. See the Eiffel Tower. This picture is taken probably about the midpoint between World War I and World War II. 19 got into World War II in the late 30s, and of course, for World War I was. This picture is taken about midpoint between World War I and World War II. It shows France, a very old country, but it shows the new technology starting to emerge, and you got to wonder what Lindbergh was sitting in that airplane thinking of. There's a story that before Lindbergh died, he went to the Smithsonian and asked to be able to sit in his airplane. They put him up on a lift into the cockpit of the Spirit of St. Louis, where he sat there for a while, made notes, did some reminiscing, and then brought back. So a very complex human being. The stories of his having fathered children in Europe came out. One of the daughters there said that just proves that he was more of a human being than a hero. Being as a man, really very, very complex. That's just kind of a brief look at the story of Charles Lindbergh, which here in 16 days will be the 91st anniversary of that historic flight, which really was the foundation of the advancement of aeronautics. You got to wonder, if nobody had ever made that flight, where would aeronautics have begun to actually go? Any questions? Yes?
The picture that you showed, the flight from New York to Paris, is there a reason, or do you know a reason of why he didn't take the short route, the Great Circle route, over Greenland to get to Paris?
I don't. And I have read part of the Spirit of St. Louis. I didn't find any notations in that either. But if I had to take a guess, I suspect it might have had to do something with weather. I couldn't say. What's that? Yeah. That's good. That's a good question to see. Yes.
You said when he landed in Paris that the people started taking parts off the aircraft.
Yeah.
How much did they take off? Was the airplane flyable after that? And the thing that's in the Smithsonian today, how much of that is the original equipment?
I think most of it is original equipment. Do you know anything about that?
As far as I know, everything that is hanging there is original. They did a restoration on it 2 or 3 years ago, and most everything was pretty close to.
The police were able to stop that pretty quickly. They were really concerned about that barograph, and they themselves punched that hole in it and pulled it out. Yeah. Once the police realized they couldn't control the crowd, and see them in the pictures up at the airplane, so at that point, I think they were fairly able to control the situation there. Yes.
I saw the picture you showed of the Smithsonian, the front cowl was gold colored. Was that added on later to preserve it or for lettering and stuff like that? Because it didn't look like that was something they did when he took off.
Let's see here.
Where you showed the there. Oh, that one shows them too.
I don't know if that's gold or if that's the lining, you know?
It's
That's-
golden.
I
Well,
think
if you go to the next one,
It's like
the one before it, it's still showing. It's a different color.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I'd suspect it's probably the lining. But I think Chris knows something that's so many. Find out. Okay. Good question. Yes, ma'am.
Over in Lordsburg said he landed there one time.
Really? Wow.
Lordsburg.
Yeah.
Map.
Well, he flew all over the country in that 48 states, 80-something stops. Yes.
Actually, I'm trying to remember that I got brain artist for charges this morning. I tried to get in touch with my husband, who's all over the place. In Vaughn, New Mexico. He was having engine problems and he had to land in a field just outside Vaughn while they were repairing his plane. He went into the old Harvey house that used to be there and was actually just sitting at the counter. He had, according to the one Harvey girl that waited on him, he had one of their famous cinnamon rolls. And he was just waiting, and when they finally said, okay, plane's ready, he then went back out to the field and took off. So that was where he did land, on New Mexico. And I know that only because of my Harvey research.
Yes, sir.
The plane was built in Ryan Aircraft in San Diego. Did he fly it from San Diego to San
No,
New York?
there is and I have it down at the office, there is a document online that is his entire log digitized. That tells you exactly all of the tests he did beforehand, where a colonel come from. He was an Army cadet and commissioned a lieutenant. He wanted to fly in World War II, but because of his beliefs, Roosevelt stopped that. He was able to get a job as a civilian advisor. I think as part of the Army, eventually just given the Army.
Wasn't it a few years ago that Hoffman was finally cleared?
You know, I hadn't read that, but I've watched some documentaries online here the past couple of weeks that talk about some of the others that might have been involved. One of them said, as I mentioned, there's a belief that he was involved in the son, and that theory comes from some evidence the son might have had some growing problems, and for someone who had his beliefs, that would not have looked well. But I tried that. Lindy being involved, yeah. Trying to find some of those old newspapers. Ones online are just basically the image. That may have been one reason why they were so fed up. The country, suspicion or that's interesting.
I think it was just, I say recently, most of the evidence circumstantial
Right.
and then that they finally were able to or whatever, and I'm not sure when that's what they said.
Well, I think the public and the press wanted someone guilty
Well, yeah.
because it'd been 2 years before he was arrested. And they just wanted something. And at the time, it's probably hard to believe that he done something like that.
So,
But there's some fairly good evidence in some of these documentaries that it's not. You're at, yeah, he was absolutely right. Yes, sir.
I don't mean to change the subject, but can you go back to the screen which showed his route? A question about what is the altitude he flew at? I'm suspecting he tried to stay near his landmarks if he could.
There's probably, the paragraph record is probably online somewhere.
And it's in his law. How do you pronounce that, Barrett? There we go. Nothing doesn't show his altitude.
That is pretty close to a bird circle now. Probably stay far enough south so that you can see freezes going. That's it.
So he's pretty much over the landing.
Yes.
Buddy.
Yeah. And if you saw that old film I showed at the beginning, it looked like he barely got off the ground. It was muddy. The runway was muddy. Looked like he almost hit the tops of the trees. In fact, in the Jimmy Stewart movie, they show that where he just.
One of the little I've read, one of the problems they had back in those days was carburetor icing.
Yeah.
Did you know if he had a means of melting any carburetor icing?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming, Kathy, who I believe Sue is talking to.
I believe Sue is talking.
Is that where she left?
Going to talk about Sally Ride and her e-ticket, which some of you have ever been to Disney World. Those probably know about the tickets that they have for various rides or what they used to have. And she's a very important lady. You'll find out why she's so important. And something that she has done that still carries her name today, that's used for students to get them interested in looking at images of Earth from space. And that's just one of the many, many things that she.
And that will be on Friday, June 1st, same bat channel, same bat time,
Assuming I'm here.
assuming she's here. And I don't know if you all have plans for tomorrow, but I do invite you to come and join us at Holloman Air Force Base tomorrow for their air show. It's gonna be pretty exciting. I believe the gates open to the public at 8:30. You might check that if you'd like to attend, but it's free, of course. And I believe the public all comes in through the west gate. Just so you know. And of course, our summer camp program starts on June 4th. And a new week of that starts every Monday following that roughly, for 7 weeks. And I think that's about enough excitement for us right now. Yes, sir.
Any idea what kind of aircraft they're gonna show, or are they gonna have P-51s?
Yes.
They're gonna have a heritage flight.
Yeah, I thought I saw.
Newspaper, they said,
I hadn't seen the picture. Yeah, it's supposed to be a really good show. And we'll be there in one of the hangars, so come and say hi to us. And if you've not already put your email, sign up over here on the sign-up sheet, and I'll make sure that when we send out press releases about what we're doing, you get that information, so you know when the next Launchpad lecture is, or any other fabulous and exciting thing we've